Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 2 years in, the second year in opposition, and the opposition are pretty much exactly where they were about 2 years ago. They're roughly about the same in the polls as where they were. Phil Goff's ratings are about the same where they were. In fact, Phil Goff is now in competition with the CPI index to see on his popularity rating. No one knows the man. Their factions are deeper, though. That has changed. The various factions are trying to work out who will be the next leader, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as Mr English just noted there, nothing's changed in it. They still think the voters were wrong in 2008. That's what they're speaking. Well, Mr Speaker, Voodoo Labour Party is here. Voodoo Labour Party is back. The various factions, the people over there, are putting pins in their various voodoo dolls of each other, and the Honourable Chris Carter was right. That gentleman over there is probably a nice guy according to him, but he won't win the next election. Mr Speaker, voodoo economic policy has arrived with a couple of speeches in the last couple of weeks from the finance spokesman on the other side and the leader of the opposition. Voodoo economics is here, flip-flops, axing the tax buses, races around the country, but no commitment, Mr Speaker. Voodoo taxes are on the way if the Labour Party was ever to come back, Mr Speaker. Voodoo tax increases for across the board is what they seem to be promoting now, Mr Speaker. Voodoo gift duties coming back under a Labour government, even though the Crown collects $1.5 million a year and it costs the economy $70 million. That is voodoo economics. Voodoo GST changes are coming according to the Labour government because they may be taking GST off fruit and veggies, but we're still not sure if they're going to reverse the whole lot or not, Mr Speaker. And this thing called the voodoo inbound transaction tax. Now, this is what Labour's promoting, and I'll come back to that in a moment because that is voodoo stuff. Voodoo spending from the Labour Party, Mr Speaker, we're up to about $7 billion right now. A voodoo leader who is now copy and pasting speeches from the United Kingdom Labour Party, Mr Speaker. They're promoting a voodoo monetary policy, Mr Speaker. They're actually doing the reverse of exactly what every central bank, every government around the world is doing to try and address the global financial crisis. They are trying to weaken, essentially, the parameters that the Reserve Bank must operate under, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, they've got a voodoo accounting policy over there now. I'll bring you a quote which comes from the person that will one day would like to be the next finance minister. Just listen to this, Mr Speaker. This is a quote from his recent speech. If the government invests in growing an asset like a forest, that asset appears on both sides of the Crown balance sheet. No. Assets only appear on one side of the Crown's balance sheet, Mr Speaker. That asset appears on both sides of the Crown balance sheet and need not increase net debt, but does increase net worth. Now, what on earth is that about? A third-form economics student would be failed and sent to the back of the class if they put that kind of stuff in some kind of essay. I have no idea what it's about, Mr Speaker. It is voodoo accounting coming with the voodoo Labour Party. They have a voodoo finance spokesman. We're not sure if it's Mr Cagle resurrected or Mr Cunliffe, and Mr Goff is even not too sure. They have a voodoo investing policy, Mr Speaker. They want to borrow from foreign markets to give to the super fund to invest in foreign markets. Can't work that one out, Mr Speaker. This inbound transaction tax, it's a voodoo tax, Mr Speaker. This is what they are now promoting. What would that mean? Higher interest rates for New Zealand. That is a tax on exports. Every receipt that comes into New Zealand under a Labour government would be caught up by this new thing called the inbound transaction tax, Mr Speaker. Any money sent home from New Zealanders, our kids overseas or friends overseas wanting to send money, will be subject to Labour's new voodoo inbound transaction tax, Mr Speaker. I am very, very fearful of what that might do, Mr Speaker. They essentially want our kids to stay away and stay away for longer. Why do they hate success so much, Mr Speaker? Voodoo asset management. They want to take a more active role in the economy. Not one of them spent more than 5 minutes in the real sector. Not one. And Mr Goff wants to put his shorts on, his socks on and his sandals, put his clipboard, put his pins in his pocket and go around various SOEs and companies and tell them how to run the show, because that's what this new voodoo asset management policy of the Labour opposition is promoting, at least as trying to get through, Mr Speaker. They want to unleash SOEs and their subsidiaries, or not their subsidiaries. Essentially, you want to sell Kiwibank, according to a speech from Mr Cunliffe the other day, because he forgot, I guess, that Kiwibank is a subsidiary of New Zealand Post. But subsidiaries are those things that they want to dilute the equity of, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this national-led government is doing an awesome job, Mr Speaker. We have a challenging economic program. We are delivering better, smarter public services. We are reforming regulation. education and skills, business innovation, invest in productive infrastructure. Mr Speaker, this country does not need voodoo economics nor a voodoo Labour